Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next video on psychotherapy 1. Last video we discussed the concept of clinical assessment, and then we discussed why it was important, steps and the guidelines towards it. This video we're going to be discussing the concept of clinical observation and what exactly it is and how we should do it. So for all that and more, let's go on. Now, clinical observation is the process of visually examining the client and taking decisions about their psychological functioning through this data. So, in other words, it's an intricate process of gathering data and monitoring the activities of this client. So, the most important thing, or the most important tool for us in clinical observation, is our ability to spot visual cues, our ability to see that which is portrayed through movements, through speech, through slip of tongues and the likes. So what exactly is going on covertly through overt processes? So we are trying to make inferences about the covert operations by monitoring the overt ones. Which brings us to techniques. How exactly do we do this and still maintain the scientific procedure of treatment? So now, techniques of clinical observation. We have different techniques of clinical observation, and the ones that have been highlighted here are direct observation, naturalistic observation, video recording observation, and audio recording observation. For direct observation, we can have people in their real life settings performing their day-to-day activities and then monitoring them as they perform these activities, or you could make them perform specific activities in a contrived setting. So you can do this obtrusively or unobtrusively. Obtrusively meaning the clients are aware of you watching them, and unobtrusively meaning the opposite, where the clients are unaware that you're watching them and would need a debriefing afterwards. Now, this method of clinical observation is restricted to just overt behavior. You are just registering eye contact, blinking, limb movements, posture, personal hygiene. It is most usually used in mental status examination, where we want to know exactly how this client, subscribe to the socially agreed methods of hygiene. Their fingernails, their mode of dressing. You could also use this form of observation to determine, psychomotor characteristics, hand tremors, muscle twitching, and other forms of overt behavior that signify underlying psychological disturbances. Now, how is this different from naturalistic observation? It is different because in naturalistic observation, you are mainly just viewing the participant or viewing the client in their natural setting. And you are doing this just to maintain or to collect data about the overall behavior in that setting. Now, you could participate or you could not participate. That's where we have the participant naturalistic observation and the not participant naturalistic observation. We did an experiment once in our 100 level where we were asked to monitor the behavior of Muslims during the Eid celebration. So we went to different praying grounds and saw how the conduct were going. Some of us had to take part in participant observation as per the rulings of our religion, and then some of us had to go towards non-participant observation because, yes, of the rulings of our religion and the rulings of our life, basically, and our culture. So we decided to ostracize ourselves from the brain and then watch them do it, make records of behavior. Now, what other techniques are there? Video recording observation. Now, video recording observation is quite, similar to the other two we have made. The only difference is you are now using an appliance to make recording of whatever observation you made that enables you to play it over and over again after a long period of time and enable you to get an accurate measurement of the behavior. So you are getting a proper measurement of what the behavior looks like, how the behavior is exhibited over time. Then we have the audio recording observation. Now, audio recording observation is quite peculiar with those clients that have speech disorder. So you want to know what exact terms, what exact commands are they not able to make, which letters are they avoiding, or which conjugals are they, not able to pronounce, or what words are they not able to pronounce, what letters. And the audio recording observation is also good for evaluation of your processes, to know if you are actually maintaining empathy, unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and positive interaction with the client. So at any point you might be able to understand where you might have gotten it wrong as a therapist, to not be able to account for these basic necessities of the therapy room, like Carl Rogers would demand, which is unconditional positive regard, empathy, genuineness, and positive interactions. Now remember, direct observation can be obtrusive and unobtrusive. Naturalistic observation can be participant and non-participant. Video recording observation is good for you to be able to replay scenarios of the behavior over time, and then audio recording is very efficient for participants with speech disorders and for evaluating yourself as a therapist. Now, these techniques also show us how we can do it, but how can we maintain validity and reliability, which is this very soul of observation in scientific understanding of behavior? So how do we maintain validity and reliability even while using these techniques? Which brings us to our next slide: maintaining reliability and validity in clinical observation. How to make sure your eyes and ears are not deceiving you. Now, in maintaining reliability and validity in clinical observation, it is important that you define the target behavior. Now, defining the target behavior might seem easy, but you want to define specifically what that behavior is. Okay, it might involve you taking a behaviorist approach to define behavior. Now, from our previous classes on the behaviorist theory, we know that the behaviorists define behavior as a simple reaction or a simple response to a stimulus. So we need you to define behavior in that term. So how you define pressing phone, for example, or using your phone in a public space should be or could be, placing your hand on the screen of the phone to scroll up and down or to interact with the interface. That's one behavior. And at the same time, using your phone can also mean just picking a call when it rings. So defining your target behavior enables you to fully, understand what exactly is the sample of behavior you are looking for and how to measure it efficiently. Now, there's also something we know as the TBCL, the Time Behavior Checklist, TBCL. It's a pencil and paper approach developed by Paul in 1966. Now, this checklist enables you to make ticks or marks where the tick, each tick or each mark represent the duration and the frequency of the target behavior. So for the usage of phone, where I said it would be answering a call while in range, or interacting with the interface to see what's trending or who is doing what and what. A time behavior checklist would enable you determine duration by just ticking, as the name implies, a checklist. So for how many minutes, for how many times did she hold on to the phone, at what duration, how many hours, time and frequency, number of occurrences. So this checklist enables you to do that while maintaining validity and reliability. Next on the list is the Oxford Rating Scale. Now, the Oxford Rating Scale is also another pencil and paper device for recording behaviors, but this one, rather than taking a checklist, it has specific behaviors in records, like behaviors like eye contact, quality of voice, facial expression, movements of parts of the body, and other overt external behavior. So it has a rating scale it uses to define these things. Now, next on the list, we have training of raters. Now, training of raters take a different approach. Now, training of raters, as the name implies, requires us to train raters basically on what exactly is the behavior we are looking for. How does the behavior look like? And expecting some kind of consensus in their observations. So the process goes thus: you get two raters, at least two raters or judge, to observe a behavior after defining specifically what the behavior looks like, and then expect them to bring independent measurements of that behavior. Now, the training would have been efficient if both raters can bring the same count, the same frequency of that behavior. So then we know that we have raters, and then they are able to perform independent field evaluation. So once you've trained these raters, they are able to do as they please in their research. So they are able to do their research independent of supervision, and then it allows you to be rest assured that they are capable of carrying out observation, and whatever observation they make would be reliable and valid to an extent. Now, last list on the list, we have statistical evaluation, which is the backbone of the scientific process. Whatever can be scientifically proven can also be statistically proven in the presence of social sciences. So for statistical evaluation, now you want to place your observations under analysis. You want to know if there is any correlation to prove your reliability or to prove your validity. So now there are specifications for this. Now, if you carry out a correlational analysis for inter-rater reliability, which is from rater to rater, although they have they have a similar observation, if the correlation coefficient is not greater than 0.8, is not greater or equal to 0.8, we cannot confirm validity. We cannot confirm reliability. And if the correlational analysis for validity is now showing something less than 0.4, then we cannot confirm validity. So basically, there are threshold marks for reliability and validity. Now, for reliability, we said correlational analysis must give you at least a 0.8, and then for validity, it should be at least 0.4. Now, to help us remember these guidelines for maintaining reliability and validity in clinical observation, I've given an acronym here that says DTOTS. You can say DTOTS or You can refer to little potato thoughts, whatever. So D thoughts, D standing for definition of target behavior, T standing for timed behavior checklist, O standing for Oxford rating scale, and T training of raters, and the last S statistical evaluation. Now, with much said about how to maintain reliability and validity, let's look at what exactly are the advantages of clinical observation, if there are any, and what are the disadvantages. Now, for advantages of clinical observation, you are able to reflect a sample of the behavior you are trying to observe. Now, you are able to define your behavior using a sample. So unlike other forms of questionnaire where you ask people to show or to react to certain questions, with clinical observation you are able to know what you are looking out for and see what you are looking out for and measure what you are looking out for. Like I said in my first example, if you were looking out for using phone as in picking up a phone call or reacting with the interface of social media, you know what using phone means to you. Therefore, you are able to consider it as a sample variable. So you are able to pick it out as what you are looking for exactly, and then your measurement seems seamless. Now, clients can be asked to shed light on the aspect of their behavior that may be confounding to the observer. In the case of clinical observation, like we said in direct observation, where it could be obtrusive or unobtrusive, you can ask clients to shed more light on the aspect of their behavior that might be confounding to you. Perhaps in the usage of phone case, and then you observe that the person is usually just taking up the phone to just press the volume button and then putting it down. So he's not reacting with the screen, just little clicks of the volume button and then drops it down. You are able to now ask the client, oh, why would you do that? Are you trying to control the volume of music, or is it just a way for you to, assert ownership over your phone? So you are able to explain the behavior to the simplest variable as it occurs with the client. Now, last advantage that we have here is video tapes and audio tapes of observation can be played back several times in order to enhance the quality of data collected during observation. I said that during the video recording observation and the audio recording observation, that you are able to play back the videos or the material severally to make sure that your data is actually standard and sufficient enough to determine the behavior, or to determine inferences about the behavior. Now, for every good thing, or for everything that has an advantage, there's always a disadvantage, however small. But in the case of clinical observation, they have more disadvantages than advantages. Now, one of the first disadvantage of clinical observation is the internal conflicts, apprehensions, and misgivings of aspect of covert behavior that cannot be recorded using observational techniques. Now, you cannot observe internal conflicts or the client's apprehension or misunderstanding that might be going on inside. Now, like I said before in the phone case, we cannot sufficiently measure. Imagine if we were not doing, or if we were doing non-participant observation or naturalistic observation. We can't really tell why the person is constantly picking up their phone to hit the volume button alone. okay, there's no music in the room, there's no loudspeaker, but this person just picks up their phone and then hits the volume button several times and then drop it. We are unable to, record what was going on inside before the person took the phone. Or let's say we are using usage of social media interface. We are unable to judge how happy or the state of elation that comes with just reacting with the social media interface. So you are not able to quantify, or you are not able to record covert behaviors, which is unseen behaviors, mostly cognitive, that are hidden to the to the observing eye. Now, another disadvantage is not all aspects of observation can easily be quantified. Not if you were going to quantify the number of kicks of a ball in a football match, it's more easier than observing the number of times a bead of sweat drops from the footballer. So not all aspects of observation can easily be quantified. While you are counting the bead of sweat, you can forgo or you can lose sight of other things. It's the same way you can be monitoring a group of people, like in the Muslim praying ground, but you are unable to quantify sufficiently what everybody is doing at the same time, because even your attention span is limited. Now, observation is confined only to overt behavior. Like we said before, you cannot really account for aspects of behaviors that are hidden. Motivation, interest, indecision, satisfaction, level of elation. So they do not show themselves easily to observation. Somebody might be happy and not show a grain of smile at all. But then there is level of elation that could only be observable through an MRI or through invasive techniques. Now, it has been found that inter-rater reliability coefficient is usually low, maybe because raters are not often trained. Now, to get a valid clinical observation, most times requires extensive training. So, when the raters are not efficiently trained, you have an inter-rater reliability coefficient that is very low. Thus, you cannot use the result, and the result turns out to be ineffective and unuseful. Now, there's also the disadvantage of experimental bias that often confound the data collected with observational method. Now, we all have our values, our system of thought, our subjective reasonings that sometimes play a part in the way we view the world. Now, these values, these set aside rules, morals, comes to play in our observation, and then would come to interpret what we see in this observation. So most often the data collected are now interpreted based on the experimental's biases. Now, most often the data collected are not replicable, thereby making the reliability of the data questionable. Now, one thing we know about the empirical method is that it must be replicable. Your results, your data must be replicable, and this becomes a problem for clinical observation, because most times the data are not replicable because of varying situations, varying circumstances, and very internal movements that you cannot account for at that time. So with all that said, we still have other parts of clinical observation that actually has to play with psychotherapy. Now remember that we are trying to bring everything down to psychotherapy, and we are seeing how clinical observation comes to play in psychotherapy. So we are going to be discussing the concept of clinical interview. Now, clinical interview is a direct face-to-face verbal interaction between a client and a psychologist with the main purpose of obtaining information about the client, which will be used in assessing the origin, the development, and the maintenance of their psychological problems. So you are trying to determine when did it all begin, origin, how fast or how slow is it growing, the rate of development, and then what are the methods or initiative placed towards maintaining this problem. Now, this kind of interview doesn't necessarily need your CV, even though we all know that reading is not your hobby, as many of us like to put on our curriculum vitae. So what are the types of clinical interview, and what are the forms that clinical interview might take? Now we have indirect interview. Now in our notes we have direct interview first, but I'm trying to take it from behind, and I hope you all still agree with me. Now indirect interview can also be called the non-directive interview. Now, in indirect interview, the client is asked to just produce as much information as possible. So there are no questions as direct interview would have added. There are no questions basically, but then you are asking this person to give you an in-depth explanation of their life, basically, where it all began or where they think it all began. This form of interview assumes that the client is expert on their own situation. So it's their narration that helps you drive towards a possible solution for their problems or their situations. So it takes on the Carl Rogers humanistic view of therapy itself, and then it also holds up the notion that any form of interaction might derail the client's train of thought. So we avoid interactions and interjections as much as possible. Interjections. So we do not interject, we do not butt into the conversation, or we do not butt into the explanation. We give chance for slip of tongues and unconscious vulnerabilities to exhibit themselves through this region. Now for direct interview, it's a whole new case. Now direct interview has three subtypes, because with direct interview you are able to ask questions. Now I'm going to start with the unstructured interview. Now the unstructured interview, unlike the structured, which we are going to be discussing next, does not have a set list of questions that they go by. Now the unstructured interview comes in a way where it looks similar to indirect interview or non-direct interview, but in the case of unstructured interview, interjection is allowed, where the therapist picks up cues from the client and then direct questioning towards that cue. So there are no questions before the beginning of the section, but then based off the narration of the client, you are asking questions to try and pinpoint the source, the development, and management of the problem. So at those critical moments, information are being obtained, and then you are able to make inferences. Now for unstructured interview, the format for interviews varies from person to person. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. One person can have many questions directed to them, and then the other can just have one or two. So it depends on the nature and the dynamic of the situation brought into the room. Now, for structured interview, they are already prepared questions. Like the name would imply, structured interview. Already prepared questions, and then you are asking the client based off that questions to determine their reactions to it. Now, unstructured interview, like we discussed before, unstructured interview most times needs a professional, because it needs the experience of a professional to be able to determine what cues to process, rather than on inexperienced and then you all meander into irrelevant conversation. You go into irrelevant conversation and then you start to probe where you are not supposed to probe just because of storytelling. So in the hands of an inexperienced person, an unstructured interview can just be a gist section rather than a clinical interview. You can just be gisting with your therapist if he or she does not know what they are doing. So for structured interview, it is helpful for inexperienced hands, because they are now prepared questions that help you, navigate your way through the narrations of the client. You can throw them open-ended questions and then read their reaction, throw them another open-ended question, read their reaction, and so on and so forth. The problem with this form of interview is that it takes a form of dogmatic approach that now leaves room for disguise. Now, while you are asking these questions, you might lose the actual source or the actual origin of the problem that you are searching for. And in some cases, the questions might not relate to the individual themselves. So how do we make up for this? We make up for this by using instruments, certified instruments, standardized instruments that have list of questions that pertain to certain conditions. We have the Beck Depression Inventory, which is very helpful with depressive symptoms. We have the Awari-Tefe psychological model. We have the Schedule for Affective Disorder and Schizophrenia, SADS, Schedule for Affective Disorder and Schizophrenia. And then we have the Structured Clinical Interview for DSM, which is what we know as the Diagnosis and Statistical Manual. So the Structured Clinical Interviews for DSM. These instruments help us to clearly state out the goals of the interview and help us direct the conversation more effectively. Now, I had this semi-structured interview because it was not really added in our notes, but it's also part of it in almost other literatures. Now, the semi-structured interview starts with a prepared set of questions, but then diverts into indirect interview. So you start with a prepared question, but judging from the trend of the therapy room, you are able to navigate back into indirect interview, where you allow the person or the client go through their narration, giving them autonomy in the therapy room and allowing them be the expert of their own condition. Now, we have, according to our note, general process of interviewing. Now, this general process of interviewing is just reiterating what we said in the last video, just replaying it. So now for intake interview, we know we are just taking into consideration the normal demographic, sex, gender, presenting complaints, and all sorts. And then we have the second interview where you are trying to generate rapport and you are trying to, gauge fully the mental status examination of the person, their hygiene, their orientation of life, and how they, generally adhere to the social ways of dressing, social modes of dressing, socially, conferred mode of dressing. Is they are dressing too flashy or too, too cold, too dull, or too vibrant. So you are trying to define the person throughout that second interview. Now, during the third occasion is when you start to build up case history, where you go deep from the birth history, which features stories of conception, stories of pregnancy, and stories of delivery, down to their educational history, religious history, forensic history, sexual history, relationship history, and every part and function of the person's life. So that is the general process of interview, where you have it according to psychotherapy. Now, what are the advantages of clinical interview? We've discussed the advantages and disadvantages of observation. Now, why we are taking a more standardized approach, what are the advantages of this? Now, a large amount of information is obtained more than in any other assessment techniques. Now, in objective assessments or in other forms of assessment techniques, you are only able to receive the amount of information that the person give according to their reaction to the stimulus you present to them or to the questions you given to them. Now, with clinical interview, you have a larger pool of information because client is expressing themselves, is able to express themselves to their best knowledge. So with case history, you are going through every iota of their life, and then you have a large amount of information to draw conclusions from. It is easy to obtain information about the client's internal conflict. So with more understanding of how the person's life or the timeline of the person's decision has gone throughout their life, and with a more structured approach, you are able to now understand, or you have a clearer view of the internal processes that go on within the person. So with more and more stories and narrations of their childhood experiences and how they've attached accomplishments to the approval of their parents, you are able to determine motivation. With more stories about their educational history, you are able to determine interest. With more stories about their childhood history, you are able to determine attitude and how attitudes have grown throughout the years through forensic history and sorts like that. So you are able to fully develop the paradigm of the person's life. However, with this many advantages, we still have disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of clinical interview? There is still a premise, or there's still the possibility of interviewer bias. Now, like I said before, we all have our attitude, we all have our beliefs, we all have our norms, and there's a way these things show up in evaluating others. So interviewer bias might show up during clinical interview and then disorient the data you've gotten. However, objective it might come, subjective reasoning in interpreting it might disorient the whole process. Now, the client expectations may confound the information given. This means the client may sometimes express only those things he or she believes the psychologist is interested in knowing. Now, this happens particularly in non-directive interviewing. Now, if you remember, in non-directive interviewing, we say the person is in charge of giving the entire narration. You are not interjecting the questions, you are just asking the person to explain the entire origin, prognosis, and maintenance of the problem. So you are giving them a free rein over explaining themselves, and then they tend to now determine within themselves what you are meant to know and what should be kept with them. So in a way, there's a kind of filtering of information that allows them hold back certain ones due to their, conceived idea of what the therapist wants to hear or what it doesn't want to hear. So what other disadvantages are there? We have the amount of information given by the client may either not be adequate or accurate or relevant as a result of unconsciously using defense mechanisms. Yes, there are defense mechanisms in play. We have denial, we have projection. In the therapy room, we also have transference. So certain information might be withheld due to unconscious defense mechanism in play. So strong emotions might be relayed to you, and then because of the strong emotions a child feels to his parents that doesn't want to make them talk to him, and then he transfer it to the therapist, and then rapport is just dead. You are able to maintain rapport again. The child or the client doesn't want to talk to you, and then therapy ends from then on. So these are the identified disadvantages of clinical interview, and their magnitude exceeds what we've been able to discuss during the course of this video. Now, it is important that we also look out for other disadvantages and advantages of clinical interview and try to play out scenarios in our head as to how this concept play out in our normal life, in our day-to-day activities, so that we are able to further explain it in the exam hall. So for all that and more, I'll see you guys on the next video. Please, if you have questions, place it in the comment section and we'll deal with it as soon as possible. Thank you.